Okay, this is Mr. Ballack. I am interviewing with expert naturalist Jason Matthews, and we are going to be doing an interview today to learn a little bit about naturalists and what he does and how nature has impacted his beliefs regarding nature and the world we live in. So Jason, would you be able to tell us about, basically just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you live, where you're at right now, and some other interesting facts about yourself. Okay. All right. Can you let me go to chat here and see if I can chat with him.
I'm here. Can I introduce myself?
Yes.
Oh, my name is Jason Matthews. I live in Bozeman, Montana, and I'm based out of Yellowstone National Park. Currently, I am in Fairbanks, Alaska, and I'm working up here as a naturalist and guide, basically taking international groups into the Arctic to look for polar bears and basically just educate them on polar bears and climate change. Did you get all that?
Yes, sir. Okay.
Okay, great. So yeah, I'm a naturalist as a profession, naturalist and guide, and so what that means is I've spent a lot of time studying, researching, learning about the natural world, and then things that I learn and things that I see, I share with other people, and so I do that in a few different ways, with videos, with photos, or my favorite thing is taking people into the field with me to learn about bears and wolves firsthand and other sort of creatures and just about the landscape.
Okay. So Jason, could you explain a little bit more in terms of what a naturalist is for the third, fourth graders who have never heard that term before? And I think more importantly is, why should we care about our nature, and the community that we live in?
Sure. Okay, so a naturalist is basically someone who is trying to better understand the natural world around them, basically try to see the interconnectedness between all things in nature and just learn about them as much as they can. And then the important thing about being a naturalist too is that you don't just learn these things, you have to share them. And so that's ultimately what I do, is research wolves, research bears, research the Arctic, places like that. And then what I find out, I try to share with other people, be it by taking them out firsthand into as a guide, or by sharing photos or talks like this.
All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate you coming out to take the time to do this. What would you say is your favorite and your least favorite thing about your job as a naturalist?
My favorite part is basically getting to do what I love and really get to explore wild places, get to travel a lot to really beautiful places like Alaska or Tibet, places like that, and then getting to share those things with other people. That's really one of my favorite things. Like the Northern Lights. Last night we went out and saw the Aurora Borealis. If you guys don't know what that is, maybe you could look it up later today or sometime soon. But I got to share that with some people from Australia who had never seen it, and it was just a really magical experience. So I really like sharing things about our natural world with people, especially when it's their first time to explore some of this stuff. My least favorite part is I have two young kids. I have a 4-year-old son and a 7-year-old son, and I travel a lot. I'm usually gone about 120 days a year from my house, traveling to other states, other countries. And so I'm away from my kids a lot. So that is the hard part for me. But other naturalists work closer to home, and so that doesn't have to be a part of the job that you're always away from your family. Just the places that I have chosen to really learn about and explore seem to be a long ways from where anybody lives.
Okay. Um, Now, you did say that you focus primarily on bears and wolves. What made you choose that as your focus as a naturalist?
So I've had there's a couple of reasons. One is I had a really interesting experience with a grizzly bear once where I was um, charged by a grizzly bear. So that means, a grizzly bear sort of ran at me. And it really, I was with a friend, and when this bear came running over this hill straight at us, um, and it came just a few feet from us, I really um, thought that, I was probably about to get really hurt, maybe killed. And then the bear turned and veered off and ran away from us. And we stood there, and we both basically, were at the verge of tears because it had been such a traumatizing event. But what really happened there is I learned that we as humans don't dominate the world. We don't own the world. We share the world. And at any moment, something like a grizzly bear or any other large predator or carnivore, it could eat you, make you part of the food chain, essentially. And so that's when I really realized that we're all connected. We're connected to the animals are connected to us, all the animals are connected together. And, it was just a real big moment when I stopped being this human that felt I was dominating everything and realized that I was part of the food chain, that I could have been dinner. And so that was a pretty big moment for me. Now, why I really like to study bears and wolves are because where I'm from in Montana, they are what are known as keystone species. And so that means they're all the other animal species around there are connected to what these wolves and bears do. So if you took one of them out of the system could potentially collapse or have problems. So what I mean by that is, take a wolf, for example. Wolves eat elk. Elk eat grasses. Elk eat tree branches and shoots. If they eat too much of that stuff, they eat too much tree branches and shoots, well, then beavers don't have anything to gnaw on. And so if you take away the wolf, you get too many elk, and then the elk impact the beavers. And then before long, there's if you don't have beavers, you don't have wetlands, because the beavers aren't building their dams to flood waters. And then if you don't have wetlands, you might not have ducks. And so that's the thing about wolves and bears, is they are keystone species, that they are directly independent to all the other animals that are there. Did you guys hear all that all right?
Yep. Yeah, we heard it perfectly clear.
Yeah,
so
great.
just to elaborate, I hear you say that it goes, the connection with the bears and the wolves being keystone animals, again, kind of supports your philosophy or your belief that everything is connected, and not just animals, but wildlife as a whole. So plants and animals are all connected.
You got it. Yeah, we're all connected by a web. We're all interdependent on one another. The simplest way to put it is we eat animals. Animals eat plants. Plants need bugs to spread their seeds and do all this variety of things. So we're all interdependent on one another. And so if you take one thing away, it impacts all that system. And so if you took perhaps too many things away, well, it could impact the food, which impacts the animals, and we may not have enough food for the planet or something along those lines. So I really, if you start looking around at any species, be it plant or animal, you realize how we're all connected to it. And if you take one of those things away, it really impacts us all.
All right. Well, thank you for explaining and clarifying for the kids. Going back to your experience with the bear, I can imagine having that face-to-face encounter with a 8 foot plus bear. But would you be able to explain or elaborate like how this encounter with nature affected your beliefs and wanting to become a naturalist?
Sure. Now, when that happened, I was already well on my way. I'd been working in wild places and been working as a guide, and had already sort of, started to understand those natural connections throughout the world. But I don't think I had really connected, and so that's the big, I guess, that was the big defining moment for that. You can read about these things, you can watch videos, you can hear discussions, and talk about it, but there's another big leap to where it really sort of drives it home, and that's feeling that connection yourself. And so that, I would say, was why that was such a defining moment, was that it wasn't just theory anymore. It wasn't just a guy talking to a class saying we're all connected. It was realizing at that moment that I wasn't just a human. I wasn't just an observer watching what was happening, but I was actually in the middle of the food chain. And so just as I might eat a hamburger, this bear could have eaten me. And so that was just a real thing, to not just think of it as some vague sort of theory, but like really see it in practice. And I've also had some other experiences where I've seen grizzly bears take down elk calves. So that's like a deer type, a young one. And so when you see that, you go from seeing something that you think is beautiful, like this young elk, to all of a sudden you see it not so much as just this beautiful thing in itself, but that it is also becoming part of the food chain, that it is connected. And you can just see from seeing that, I could see, well, I could also be that same sort of thing, that from the outside observer, I seem to be this individual, just as that elk calf was an individual. But in the grand scheme of things, I'm not really so much an individual. I'm just another source of energy. I don't know if that necessarily makes sense, but it just made me realize sort of my own insignificance in the bigger, broader world. And so I think that's why that was just a really defining moment.
All right, thank you. Just to, I guess, we in fifth grade we've been reading about three main characters, three main naturalists. One being Ansel Adams, Henry Thoreau, and John Muir. I know we had talked about it before, but would you be able to tell us how they influenced your career as a naturalist and joining National Geographic?
Sure, absolutely. So I would say I was first introduced to other naturalists, sort of the three biggest names, I would say, in being a naturalist. Much later in life than you guys. You guys are in fifth grade. I think I was more maybe 18, a senior in high school or just out of high school when I first really read Thoreau. And at that time, I was already really interested in backpacking and hiking and things like that. But I hadn't really been too introspective, and I hadn't really thought about my role in the natural world. I just knew that I liked hiking, and I knew I liked being outside. And then I read Thoreau, and he had, I'll always remember this quote, and it's such a good quote that you see it on T-shirts and things like that. And it said, "In wildness is the preservation of the world." And I remember reading that and trying to think about, what does he really mean in wildness is the preservation of the world? And so I really, over time, what that means to me is sort of shifted. But then I remember that I thought it was very simple, that if you have wild places, you would have places for wildlife to live, and we all need that because we're sort of connected. So we should have just these wild places for animals. And so that was a pretty simplistic view. Now, as my life's advanced, I've gotten older, and I've sort of seen more things, I guess. I've come to understand that what he meant was not only um, in wildness is or wild animals preserved, but for us as humans, there's a huge impact of wild places on our own sort of mental development, our own psyche, our own spirit. Whenever I find myself in a stressful situation or I have a lot of things to think about, I realized, hey, if I go to a wild place and go on a hike or just even sit out and simply watch ducks or watch deer or whatever, then it really has a calming effect on me. And so not only is preserving wild places for wildlife important, it's important for us as humans to be able to sit and connect with nature and see that there is a bigger world around us, and perhaps our problems aren't as big as we think they are. It's it's just calming to your soul, to your spirit, to have these wild places. And so that's I came to realize that's what Thoreau meant. It wasn't just about the animals, but for all of us. We all need these wild places. So that was a big one. Um, John Muir, I think, came to me after that. I think I was a member of the Sierra Club, and I was reading about how the organization came about John Muir, and I really became fascinated with him because he basically, above everything, he always wanted to just be outside. He always wanted to hike. He always wanted to see new things. And how that had come to him, why he was so just into it, is he had a accident where he was blinded. He was working like as a welder or in a metal shop of some sort. He became blind from some sparks flying in his eye or something. And as he was lying in his hospital room, he basically said, to himself that if he could ever see again, he would not waste his time in life doing things that didn't matter. He would use his eyes to basically see all the wonders of the world. And so he did get his sight back, and then he had decided he better live up to the promise that he'd made. And so he went out to basically see as many wild places as he could. And in doing that, he really became, I would say, the father of the whole naturalist movement, because it wasn't that he just went out and looked at the world. He, over time, really began to understand the natural world around him. And a really great quote that's always stuck out to me, and that is, if you pull any one thing, you find that all things are connected to it. And so that goes back to what we were, and that's paraphrasing, that might not be the direct quote, but that is the concept, that if you grab one thing out of the universe, and you find that everything is connected to it. And so it's simple as, you pick up a flower, and you realize you need that flower. Bees need that flower, they can make honey. Bears like honey. That's a very simplistic view. And we know that bears already are keystone species and how they're interconnected. So that's the idea that you're really pushed more than anyone in sort of modern Western American sort of thought. He really got that we're all connected, and really wrote about it well, and was able to convey that to future generations. So I like him a lot. Then Ansel Adams, he's definitely more modern era. Henry David Thoreau and John Muir, that was 1800s, then early 1900s, before cameras, before video, before the internet were big things. Ansel Adams came along much later, and he was a famous photographer, and his photos, basically the things that Thoreau and Muir were trying to say, Ansel Adams was a great enough photographer that he could accomplish that. He could give people a sense of wonder, that awe that you get from seeing a big, beautiful mountain or a wild river or a wild animal. His photos were so powerful and so good that those same feelings that we get from visiting wild places, now you can get them in a different medium. You can get them, in a photo format. And so I remember when I first started just seeing his photos, for me, it wasn't necessarily that I said, oh, I have this sense of connection to these places, or I was in wonder. I was like, I got to go visit a lot of them. So I've spent a lot of time in these locations that Ansel Adams has taken photos and tried to, um, just get that same sort of look, not necessarily in a photo, but just in for my own experience. One thing Ansel Adams, besides his photos, though, that he did, is he was a very outspoken, was a very devout environmentalist, and he has a quote that I just always think of when I'm sort of analyzing my own personal impact on the environment around me. And he has this quote that once nature is lost, once a wild place is lost, you can never bring it back. And so that's to me that's always been a driving force in how I try to conduct myself in business, or how I try to conduct my dealings in the world. Is you want to lessen your impact as much as you can. Once we consume the resources, or once we destroy a place, our own personal needs, well, it doesn't matter how much money we generate from that to be able to buy that place back. We're not going to be able to necessarily ever get it to return to what it once was. There is rewilding, you can plant new trees and things, but it's still not going to be that same pristine, intact ecosystem that it once was. So Ansel Adams, Thoreau, and Muir, all big influences in my life, and influences in the way I think. But I've also, it hasn't, to really be a naturalist, it's not enough to just read about it and think about it. You have to get out, you have to explore, you have to walk around, you have to visit these wild places. And so that's, I would say they were inspiration, but I've tried to take that inspiration and do something with it.
All right, thank you. One story that you gave me a lot of great information. So one things that we read about was when John Muir, in our nonfiction narrative, him and Roosevelt, and they talked about the sequoia trees, and they said in the book, it said something similar to what you had just mentioned, how we need to protect nature for future generations. So there?
Broke up there?
Okay, you're back. So let me just make sure. So I just have one final kind of discussion point, and then I'll have the kids. I'll bring up the kids' questions for you. So we talked about how we talked about preserving nature, and we talked about for future generations. So, in your opinion, in your expert opinion, like how can we show that we appreciate and value nature in our lives around us? And what can we do to positively impact nature in our communities? Did you get all that?
So I'm not exactly, I didn't. So, I heard something about future generations and impact and communities.
Okay, so what are some things that we can do as fifth graders to positively impact nature so that we could preserve the nature in our environment for future generations?
Sure. So I think the first thing, I think that something we all need to do, and this is something that Thoreau really drove this point home in Walden. That was sort of his, and that is to live an examined life. Live an examined life. And so what does that mean? And so to live an examined life means that you think about, your impact on the world. And so just a simple example would be, we all realize that using too much fossil fuels is a bad thing. And so one simple thing is, if it's only a few blocks to school, do you really need a ride, or could you walk or ride your bicycle? Those are ideas that we need to examine. what is our impact, and then what can we do about it. Now, there are certain times that we are going to have an impact, but you can always try to analyze your life. And so not only is it just one side of your life, how do you get to places? Could you walk, or do you need to drive, or could you take a bus? It's also even your food. You have to buy food that is in a box and pre-packaged and all that, or is there fresh fruit that you could buy, or fresh vegetables? Or do you, if you live in such a northern climate, is there a certain time of year that you don't have to go to the grocery store to get your fresh vegetables, but you could go to a farmer's market and get local things? So in every aspect, you need to evaluate, or it would be nice if we all evaluated our impact on the world. So live an examined life. So how long of a shower do you take? You know, how many showers a week do you take? There's because that's all utilizing water. You know, think about those. And first, start at home, lowering your own impact on the world around you. Drive less, eat more local, things of that nature. Use less water. Make sure that things aren't dripping at your house. If your sink just drips, is there a way that you can stop that dripping? Or can your dad or your mom stop that dripping? Things like that. Evaluate your own impact and do what you can to lower your impact using less resources. The next thing that we can all do is repurpose and recycle. So we know we have to use, we have to get to school, we have to get to the store, we have to eat. We know we're going to use resources, but instead of being a disposable culture where we throw everything away, instead of just throwing your can in the garbage or your bottle in the garbage, make sure you're always sorting that stuff out and recycling it, so we don't have to use more trees and more natural resources to create new products. We can recycle the things we have and then reuse. That's a huge deal. That if something breaks, fix it. Don't just throw it away and get a new one. Repair it. That's one thing. But then repurpose is, can't think of a good idea or a good thing on repurpose in my head now, but maybe you can elaborate on that after our interview. But those are some basic things that you can do is lower your impact, just evaluate your life and figure out ways that you can continually reduce that impact and get your family to do that with you. It's actually a pretty fun project. My sons and I work on what we can do to reduce or reuse things. Something I really recommend is find an animal that you really like. So it could be your yard or park in your city, or it could be an animal you see in your yard or you're in that park, and then learn as much as you can place an animal, and then find out if that animal, if that place, if there's anything you can do to make their lives better. So that could be something as simple as there's a park that you like to go to down the street, and there's litter and things like that. There's weeds that are there. Maybe there's a group that gets together twice a year for an hour and pulls weeds or picks up trash or whatever. So you can impact that place that you like just like that. Or if there's an animal that you're really interested in, you say, oh, I really like white-tailed deer. Research, learn as much in your area, and just find out, how they're interacting in the natural world and how that fits in with you, and then find out if issues related to them, and if there's any organization that is doing anything to maybe create more wild spaces that for deer or something along those lines, and volunteer a little bit to help out. And we're not talking all your spare time. You can still play baseball or football and do the things you like to do, but a year is a great place to start of working, volunteering to make the world a more livable place where you get to see more wildlife and play or visit in more wild places.
All right, thank you for your suggestions. Just kind of re-emphasizing what you had said, to make sure that you are reducing, what you're using and possibly even reusing. One of the key examples that stands out to me is water conservation. So I know you said, taking less shower or not as long as a shower, or turning off the water when you brush your teeth. Those type of things will help to preserve water, and to think that water is something that we are all connected to, going back to what you said earlier, and just kind of being aware of that and being considerate and thinking of how can we reduce the amount of use of our natural resources, or how can we reuse our natural resources to positively impact our world. In addition to that, you had mentioned that going out into a place of nature like a park, and just kind of suggesting that, going out, either observing the landscape or an animal that catches your eye, and just kind of observing that animal or observing that land, and think of how I can make a difference to make our world better, or to make that place better. To kind of preserve that nature, that connection we have with nature. Is that correct? Okay. Well, I do thank you for, taking time to really, go into depth with your answers and to answer my questions. I know the kids have been waiting anxiously, so they have a few questions for you as well. Do you still have the questions, or would you like me to read them to you?
Let's see where we are here. Yeah, maybe read them out. I'm not getting them to pull up.
Okay. So I have one student who asked, how long have you been a naturalist?
A professional naturalist for working for National Geographic or other organizations. Let's see, for about 11 years. Where I've actually, I know enough about the natural world that people would pay me or ask me to tell them about it. Yeah, a little over a decade. But I've been a student, I would say, naturalist since my teens. I really got into doing things on my own, away from my family, backpacking, hiking, exploring on my own when I was about 17. And that's not long after that when I started really getting into Thoreau and Muir and things. And so 27, 37, almost 28 years or so, I would say I've been a naturalist. I'm in my mid 40s, so yeah, well over 20 years.
Awesome. Another student asked, is being a naturalist hard?
It's hard to make a living as a naturalist. But just being a naturalist, being a naturalist can be as simple as trying to learn as much as you can about the natural world around you. And so that's not the hard part. The hard part is, sharing what you learn. And so it's not too hard to share what you learn just to tell people about it, but to get people to listen and is tough, and to get people to pay you to do those things is tough as well. And so it's a tough way to make a living, but it's a easy way to have a passion about life. And so I would like to think that everybody could be a naturalist. I think everybody is a naturalist. We're all our heads are always working, our brains are working, trying to figure out the world around us. And so, you guys are all naturalists already. You're trying to figure out how this world works. And so you just have to keep pursuing that if it's an interest, to the point where people want to listen to what you have to say about how the natural world works.
All right, thank you. Besides the bear moment, another student asked, have you had another close encounter with nature like you had described earlier?
Yeah, I've had lots of moments with bears and things like that. Mainly bears. Just a fun sort of fact. Just 2 days ago, I was in an area in the Arctic that there were. I saw 40 some odd, about 42 polar bears in one day, all coming to feed on this whale carcass. So that's, I mean, the number of bears I've seen in my life and had close encounters with, I almost can't even keep a tabs on it anymore. But I do have another story. It's not so much feeling connected because I feel like I was part of the food chain, but it's just sort of another story. And so some long ago, I would say about 2002, so over a decade ago, I was out camping with some friends, and we had spread just some blankets on the ground, and we were uh, laying out at night, looking up, watching the northern lights. And again, I've mentioned the northern lights one other time. If you don't know what those are, maybe you guys should look that up and look at some photos after our interview. I was laying out in the middle of the night in Alaska, looking at the northern lights. And as I was laying there, I drifted off asleep, and it was pretty cool. I was wearing a coat, laying on this blanket. Well, I woke up really cold a few hours later, and so when I woke up, this is a little weird. My whole body was just really cold, and I had my arms sort of outstretched. And when I first woke up, I looked up at the trees, and as I moved my fingers from my outstretched arms, the spruce trees that were on either side of me looked like they were extensions of my arms and went up. And as I moved, the wind blew through those branches, and those moved as well. And so for a split second, in this sort of half dream that I had woken up with the stars and northern lights over my head, seeing as I moved, the whole universe sort of moved and breathed with me. So that was a really big moment in my life where I went, wow, we are, although I wasn't really connected physically as it felt like in that split second in the dream, but it really made me have this deeper understanding of, yeah, we are really connected. It was only a split moment in this, sort of half dreaming state where I felt that I could feel it, but all the time those connections are there. We're just not always in our normal brain state, aware of those connections, but those connections are always there. And so that was always just an experience that it was just a really wild experience. It's something you can only feel, you can't really explain too well. But again, that was just from being out for a long period of time observing nature, that put me in a position where I could feel something like that.
All right, thank you. Another question is, with your focus on wolves and bears, is there anything specific you focus about them? Earlier that they were keystone pets or animals in that environment. Yes. But is there something specific that you focus on? One of the kids asked.
Yeah, there is. So I've really been researching and spending time in Kaktovik, Alaska. That is an Inupiat Eskimo village about 250 miles above the Arctic Circle, and it's on the coast of the Arctic Ocean. And the polar bears that live there are known as the Southern Buford Sea population. There's 16 polar bear populations in the world. That's one of the populations. And that population has declined 40% in the past decade. And so something I've been researching there is about habitat loss. What's going on? Why have so many polar bears vanished? So think about it. We'll say, I don't know how many students there are behind me. Are there 20 students behind me? How many students?
That? 24.
So imagine if 40% of you, someone give me some math numbers there. What's 40% of 20? Someone help us out.
What's about 50? What's half of 24? 12. So maybe 11, 10 of you. About 11 or 10 of you.
Perfect. So now imagine that in the next few years, 10 of you people just vanished. So polar bear population, where I've been going, of the couple of thousand polar bears that live there, almost half of them, boom, have just vanished. They've died because of habitat loss. That's something I've really been trying to learn as much as I can about. Research through books and articles, but also firsthand spending time in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge where these bears live, and trying to just figure out what's going on. Another place that I've been studying habitat loss and its impact on bears is in Yellowstone National Park. There are grizzly bears in Yellowstone National Park. They've been on the endangered species list. That means they've been very threatened, like they could go extinct. They've been on that endangered species list since when your parents were born, probably in the 1970s. And so now their numbers have started to recover some, but there's still a real threat to them that they're having less and less habitat. And so I've been trying to come to a better understanding of what sort of impacts are on the habitat. So the habitat is where the bears live, trying to understand the impact there, and then educate people on what these threats are to grizzly bears, and try to come up with a real sort of factual idea. Should they still be on the endangered species list, or are they good to go? Is there enough of them that we don't need to be worried about them? So those are the two main things I've been studying with bears, are habitat loss and the impacts on threatened or endangered bears.
Okay. And then, you talk about the impacts. What have you learned about the impacts? Is there anything, can our actions in Pennsylvania affect the polar bear habitats up in Alaska?
Absolutely. So the biggest impact, I guess, the biggest thing that's happening with habitat loss is the loss of sea ice. And so why we're losing sea ice, the ocean temperatures are raising, and we are having we're seeing longer summers in the Arctic. So summer starts sooner, summer goes longer. You're probably seeing the same thing where you guys live. It's just hotter longer. And so polar bears need the ice to live. They need the ocean to be frozen over for long periods so they can go out and hunt seals. And so since we're seeing these longer summers and warmer ocean temperatures, the sea ice is disappearing, and the bears have to go longer periods that they can hunt and eat seal. And so since that's the main part of their diet, that's a big deal. Now, what can we do back in Pennsylvania or Montana or wherever we might live? Basically, what I was saying earlier, lower the amount of that you're using, specifically fuels, fossil fuels. I'm sure you guys have talked about greenhouse gases and things like that. The more you drive around, the more sort of smoke your car's putting out. The more gas you put into your car, the more you're impacting polar bears. And so that's a big thing to think about, is that thousands of miles away, us just driving around, cruising, looking at stuff for no reason, or driving when we could have easily walked or ridden our bike, is basically impacting polar bears to the point that 40% of them have died in the past decade in this one area. So again, 40%, that's about half of this class just disappearing, not making it to your senior year in high school or something, because where you lived was basically had become an unsuitable place. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So, yep, that makes perfect sense. I'll just clarify for anyone who's still watching. But for example, we have Lampeter Fair coming up. If you live close, instead of driving, one thing to do would be to walk to Lampeter Fair versus driving. So that would be one way, if everyone could walk to Lampeter Fair, if you're close enough, then you could, little by little, if everyone did that more and more often and thought like that, they would be able to save more of the polar bear population that you were speaking of.
Sure, definitely. That's that. In the most simplistic terms, I think that's it. The less we drive, the more habitat, the more places that we can maintain for wild animals.
Okay. Well, I have one last question, and then I will let you go.
All right.
So, kind of a side note, but the kids were asking about your sled dogs.
Sure.
So they were wondering, what is the name of the dog you love best, and what would be the name of your lead dog? Might even be the same dog.
Well, the dog that at this point I think I've had the longest is this dog Kuna, and I got her when she was not a tiny little puppy, but a young dog, a yearling. So still very puppy acting, but almost full size. And she is 13 years old now, I think, 12, 13 years old, and she is still really just this happy, crazy acting dog. She's in really good health in general. And if you saw her, you'd think maybe she was 5 or 6 years old, because she is just always this happy, tail wagging, bouncing around, sort of really fun dog to hang out with. And she's definitely my favorite. I would say, or the dog that most is, is she still happy? Are we doing things to keep her alive? Where she's excited about it. And she was one of my main lead dogs for many years. I would say she is not currently my main leader. She really doesn't. She's pretty retired now. My main lead dog now, my best leader, is a dog named Aspen, and he is a all-white dog, very thin-headed. He's very tall and lanky dog, and he doesn't really like Kuna, who really loves to interact with people. Aspen is a little more shy. He doesn't necessarily want people to hug on him or do more than just pat him on the head. But what he wants to do more than anything in life is run, run, run. And he really always likes to listen and do what you want him to do. So he knows his rights from his left. He can speed up. He can slow down on command. He can do anything you want him to do, basically. And essentially, he never messes up. You never really even have to discipline him. He's figured out that if he does what you ask him to do, he can keep running. And so when you get to a junction in a trail, if you tell him to go right, well, he doesn't want to stop and decide which way is right. He's learned the command so much that he'll just automatically turn to the right when you tell him to. He won't doubt you, because he knows he's going to get to keep running. So if I had 100 dogs like him, boy, that would be incredible.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Jason, for taking the time.
Thank you guys for inviting me to speak with your class. I appreciate it.
All right. Fifth grade, look at the camera. What do you say?
Keep it wild.
Peace out from Pennsylvania.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.